Hey everybody, this is part 2 to chapter 7 on followership. Oh my gosh, I bought an stand-up, sit-down desktop thing. It feels really good to be standing up for a while. Followership. Now this is, up till now, this whole book has been talking about leadership theory, right? So this talks about followership-centric studies, right? We're starting to really realize, I mean, you don't have a leader if you don't have followers, right? That we really need to understand this whole idea of what it means to be a follower, and followership is a takeoff from the word follower. And as you can see here in the reading, they define them as two different things. But we're really starting to figure out how important it is for a strong organization to do well and prosper, to think about this idea of where their followers are, what these behaviors are, and the relationship between leaders being not only leaders but also followers themselves. So in the book here, they talk about upward influencing. This is really important because it happens all the time. You heard me before talking about informal leadership. There's a lot of that going on here, a ton of it going on here. We have way more followers than leaders. And when we talk about span of control, which you would have learned about in our supervision principles class, how many people do you have under you? So if you lead, let's say you have 27 people you're managing, well, there's 27 people there with the possibility of how many informal leaders, when in formal leaders we have one. Now that's exponentially, look at through the entire organization. Wow, right? So we can't ignore this kind of stuff. Now, by definition, they say followership refers to the behaviors followed that result from the leader-follower mutual influencing relationship, right? It's an interactive concept versus just being a follower. They define that differently as someone who's under the direct influence and authority of a leader, and they just leave it at that. That's why it's important to understand the difference, because followership is now going way past that, right? So when we look at the different behaviors of effective followers, and there's a lot of different, this book talks about two different models here, but in essence, it boils down each time to these five type of behaviors. And I like that the book put it this way to get us in this mindset of these five different things: the courage to accept responsibility, the courage to serve, the courage to question, right? The courage to be part of necessary change, and the courage to take a moral stand when necessary. That's behavioral in nature, isn't it? Now, those aren't necessarily actions, but those are the behaviors that we're going to look for to be, a highly effective follower. And then when that can translate then into the type of follower you are, or that we have working for us or with us. And again, we end up with these kind of five. Barbara Kellerman, she broke things down into five different categories here. They talk about the isolates, the bystanders, the participants, the activists, and the diehards, right? Robert Kelly, he also came up with five different types of followers, but he based that on two different dimensions. He looked at this level of independent critical thinking and this level of involvement. So he put those on an axis. So if you look at Exhibit 7.1 in our book, on the bottom axis is the critical thinking line, right? And the level of involvement is on the left side. I can't remember which is X and which is Y. That's why I struggled with algebra, right? Or whatever that has to do with X and Y. Right? So he looked at the passive follower, the conformist follower, the effective follower, the alienated follower, and then the pragmatic follower, right? And so the passive follower, and I like the terminology because it pretty much says what it is, right? The passive follower, someone who is low on critical thinking, low on involvement, they kind of just come and do their job. Now, that's great. We need people like that too. Not everybody wants to, be all up in everything, right? They just come and do their job. And if they come and to work on time and do it well, that's great, right? So there's not saying that this is bad, right? The top left side is the conformist follower. This is someone who's high in involvement but low on critical thinking. So again, in other words, he's talking about maybe the sort of the yes people of the organization. They're not necessarily going to challenge anything. They're going to go along and conform to whatever needs to be done. Now, you look at that upper right-hand side. Ooh, I'm dyslexic, so that actually does look like the upper right-hand side to you. It probably is. I'm probably backwards, but I'm probably using the wrong hand. Don't look at me. Look at the book. Upper right hand quadrant is the effective follower, right? This is someone who's high on critical thinking, high on involvement, right? Um, Effective followers are not, risk adverse, right? If you look at what the book is talking about is here, they have the courage to initiate change. They're putting themselves out there. They're getting involved. This can be the manager's best asset, is the effective follower, right? Because they've got their feet in both of those accesses. Or excuse me, they're in that quadrant. Both feet are in that quadrant. The lower right quadrant is the alienated follower. This is someone low on involvement yet high on critical thinking. This one's interesting because I know a lot of people that fall into this category. I call them complainers, right? They're the ones that always feel like they're being cheated, unappreciated, either by the organization or their boss or whatever, even though they're the ones that are doing all the work or they're always doing the best work, right? And you guys know, as a matter of fact, as you read these, put names again in each of these boxes, because that's what I have done. And I can't borrow my book to people, right? Because you'd hate for their name to show up somewhere that they didn't think it should be. Oh my gosh. They're often really cynical. And these, I think I shared an example earlier where we had a professional development day and I ended up at a table with a complainer. Like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Oh, please. And then I love how they put it. They're just as happy to dwell on the negatives and ignore everything positive around them that's going on, no matter how many times I pointed out some of the good things we were doing. And then the pragmatic follower, that's the one smack dab in the middle, and they're a little bit of all four, right? And they're the thinkers. In my book, I think those guys are the thinkers. Those are the folks that are thinkers, depending on which style fits the prevailing situation. So they're a bit of a chameleon, right? They adjust. They're probably pretty flexible. We say there may be, the book refers to it as maybe being stuck in the middle, but so it's kind of hard to know where they stand until they do, right? So what, like, for example, if things are stressful, they might go one which way or the other, right? Some of them just work to get things, work in the system to get things done. That's another way that they can put it. I don't see that as being a bad style either. They're just pragmatic about it, which is what the definition of that word is, being flexible. So becoming an effective leader, we can take pains to do this better if we want to be a better or more effective follower. For one thing, who you hang out with. If you haven't realized that already, like who you go have lunch with or who you take your breaks with, has a huge effect on how other people see you. If you want to be seen as or be a more effective follower, then be mindful of who you hang out with at work. I don't hang out with the complainers. I just don't. When I have to, I do, and I can make it work. That's fine. But I'm not doing that. I'm not seen as one of those negative people. I cross a lot of departmental lines. I get myself out of the silo. I'm not going to pigeonhole myself like I'm in the business division and therefore I shall stay in the business division, right? And only advocate for my program. And when I bump into people like that, I remind them, I said, well, wait a minute, don't we all work for Western? And doesn't that mean we all work for our students? So whatever we do in the back of our mind, shouldn't we always be thinking about the big picture? Like, how does this affect our customer, which is our students, right? Even if it means it might cause a change within my program or my department. So I'm much more in that upper right-hand quadrant that way. And then they talk about the self-efficacy. The effective follower has a high self-efficacy compared to the ineffective follower. And we have to be kind of mindful as well. Be careful when we're looking at this because this is reporting on yourself, right? And I don't know too many people that go around saying, actually, I really suck. Yeah, I'm pretty crappy. I just don't really participate in anything. They don't really, kind of see themselves in a different light, right? So we have to be mindful. But in this sentence, when is defined as the person's their beliefs in his or her capabilities to produce at a certain level of performance. Because again, I've heard people go on and on and on about how they do this and how they do that, and they're always on top of things, this, that, and the other thing. And then when I hear from students, for example, and I think, wow, isn't that interesting? That's the polar opposite of what I'm hearing from students. Now, I don't listen to one person in anything, right? In a data or a survey, we have to do an aggregate. But when you start hearing it, you go, that's a little opposite there, right? But followers, they in the book also points out followers assess whether the leader's primary motivation is more for his or her personal benefit or career advancement than their own welfare and the organizations, and that affects the followers in a big way. So when you see, for example, I was doing some corporate training and I was working with the like VPs on up. I was working with the executive team. And I figured out very quickly that as they were changing roles, one person, the president and CEO, was retiring. Boy, could you see some jockeying for position, right? And that whole attitude, well, if I don't get promoted into this job, I'm out of here. So right away, that kind of tells you, interesting. It must have been interesting for what kind of follower you were to this leader that's retiring. So you made the assumption that you would be promoted into that position. And now that maybe that's not happening, it's like, I'm out of here, right? So that affects the followers, right? Because we're watching you, right? We're always watching our leaders. Just like little kids, they watch their parents and then they do whatever they do, right? We're always watching our leaders, right? The self-assessment can help give you a better idea of how effective you might be as a leader. I always caution people that when you fill it out, that's great, look at your score, but then have somebody else fill it out with you in mind, like even your boss maybe, right? It should be something to help generate a conversation and so that you can learn more about yourself, right? And the ones that you don't score as high as you think you should, look at those scores, say, well, I guess maybe if I did this a little bit better. Again, this is a way to help you become a more effective follower. Now, the guidelines to becoming an effective follower, Exhibit 7.2 talks about those, how many other, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things, like offer support to the leader, take initiative, counsel and coach. You guys can read through these. They're logical, aren't they? They're very logical. And then, so I'll let you read through that. You don't need for me to go through that. And then it goes on to say, then we also have to be careful and resist inappropriate influence from the leader. And that's where if the leader might be tempted to use their power to influence the followers, in a way that might be unethical, even illegal. Oh my gosh, do you watch the news at all? Even if you don't watch the news at all, you can't get away from it, what's going on right now with how much lying and unethical things being done, even just in our government, let alone what goes on inside organizations. Like I said, I've left bosses, I've left companies for those reasons. I left a job because of that. I saw some really unethical behavior by the owner. I'm like, man, no way, I'm out of here, man. I'm not up for that. Now, factors that can, oh, by the way, concept application 7-2, it's 7-3. If you've got the right book, which is the 6th edition, but if you have the 5th, it's the same. It's just going to be on a different page number. It's on page 246. That's a typo. It's supposed to be 7-3. Guidelines to becoming an effective follower, that you're gonna do that one in an exercise. And then factors that can enhance follower influence. This was kind of a interesting. They came on Exhibit 7.3. That oh my gosh, the diamond, the triangle. Oh my gosh, the triangle there, and those key factors that can enhance the follower's influence. Now, be mindful too. This is a double-edged sword because, I talked about informal leaders in whichever chapter I was talking about informal leaders, and we have to be really, really mindful. Or it was this book somewhere. I just lectured in that chapter, but I've done too many of these in a row. And they even make a point in this book to say it's not uncommon for followers of such stature, those that are in those higher quadrants, to exert greater influence over other followers than even the leader can. So that's why I say this is extremely important. So leaders who understand this follower type dynamic, you need to be mindful of that, of how this works, because it can be a double-edged sword, right? If it's used in negative ways, not if it's being used in positive ways, right? Remember, I've always saying use your powers towards good instead of evil. When we look at the key factors, that's power position, locus of control, and education and experience. So this power position, you might not have thought that you'd have that much power as the follower, but if you look at what the book talks about here, and if you think about it in your own workplace, how much power these informal leaders actually have, it makes sense, doesn't it? They don't necessarily have the title, but if they've distinguished themselves as someone people can trust, maybe they're the innovator, they're risk takers, they're you know, the ones that are always on top of things, right? We gravitate towards those type of people. They're very well self-managed, for example. Now that gives them a lot of power. When we look back to that little diagram of the 7 kinds of powers and those 9 types of influencing tactics, the book points out here that they could easily demonstrate personal, reverent, expert, information, and connective power. That's a lot. So your followers can garner a lot of power. And they also note here, as more and more employees come to rely on a particular follower for information or expertise or whatever it is that they like about, even just personality based, their power, their relevant power to the leader keeps going up. And now locus of control, again, people who think that they're the masters of their own destiny, right? They have an internal locus of control. I have control over what happens to me. Things don't just happen to me. Do you know anybody? I know I know more than one person, but I have one person in particular that it's never their fault. It is never their fault. Never. Now we know that can't be true, right? My goodness. But the whole world's after this person, right? And oh my gosh, they have more of that's the pawn of fate, they refer to it in the book, but they have a very external locus of control. They don't take responsibility for any of their actions, right? Those of us with a high internal locus of control, when I make a mistake, I'm like, well, I didn't mean to do it. That's why it's called a mistake. I didn't do it and try to hide it. Geez, that's too much work, man. That's why I ask you guys to tell me when you find stuff that I missed out and did wrong. It's not like I went in there and purposely typed it in wrong, right? Gosh, I wish I could be that coordinated. I'm not. My right hand wants to type the left hand keys, and my left hand wants to type the right keys. That's why you'll often see on the keyboard, if you see my misspellings, they're often the exact opposite on the home key thing. Kind of weird. Anyway, and then education and experience. The more education and experience, often the more expert power that you have, and you will also then be able to influence your other followers. But not only that, even the leader. I mean, isn't that why we hired you, right? Because we're supposed to be leaders of the organization. We're not supposed to lead in we're not supposed to have our hand in every piece of the pie. Right? We hired you for your expertise in education. I should be able to come to you and rely on what you tell me, right? Do I have to vet? If I have to vet everything you say, oh man, I don't want you to work for me. I don't want to work that hard, right? um, so keep that in mind. And then last thing I'm going to talk about is that dual role of being a leader and a follower. This is just that concept of everybody's got a boss. So I think it's super, super interesting in middle management because they have a lot of people to manage below them, but they also report to other people. And then usually in middle management, their boss is reporting to somebody else, right? So they play this dual role. Now, I'm not going to get into the last part of this chapter because I already recorded that because I wanted you to have it sooner because of where you are in the project. So I think I popped that into where did I put it? It went in the LP6 because you needed it there, but I'll just put a copy of it in with this one, and because this is going to go in LP, you're going to find this in LP13. So this, because it ends with that discussion of delegation, which I've already talked about. So there we go. That wraps up all the videos for this course. With that in mind, if you're watching this video now, that means that you're pretty much done with your projects. Oh, I'm so excited. I just love this project. I don't even want to call them projects. Not like really projects. I just see how interesting it is, the work that you do, and how much, influence and how much you help other people. I love the coaching and mentoring one, probably the most, the ED one, because you really get to put your coaching and mentoring hat on and just focus on that. So, all right, you guys, see you later. Bye.